You can have you.
Main event of the evening.
Ready to race to you.
These days are
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we are discussing Season 7, Episode 22, Father and Son.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Father and Son.
We open with Howard coming home from a meeting of the Leopard Lodge with fellow lodger Donald Hedges.
Are you all set for the Leopard Convention, Donald?
Zowie, yes! I got my car trunk filled with water balloons already!
He's bringing his son Junior along. They're just like buddies. Howard promises to bring along Richie, and then Donald leaves, after making a creepy comment about Howard's good-looking daughter growing like a weed.
That's not funny, Joni.
Howard admits to Marion that he's afraid he and Richie aren't friends anymore, and they haven't done anything together since Richie was a boy. If Howard does invite Richie, would Richie just laugh in his face? Marion assures him Richie wouldn't do that.
Richard is not that way.
Richie enters. Howard invites him, and Richie laughs and asks what's for dinner. Howard glumly goes upstairs to pack, and Marion calls Richie out for not realizing how important this is for Howard.
Ralph and Patsy and me, we got tickets to the Bears game in Chicago. We're going to Chicago this weekend.
The convention is in Chicago. Richie could stay in the hotel with his father. Fonzie and Chachi enter, and Fonzie complains about Chachi not being appropriately dressed to see his grandmother.
Yeah, he looks fine enough to wrestle a pig.
Chachi protests that he doesn't even want to visit her.
She keeps pinching my cheeks. Hey, she pinched my cheek for 13 years. It's your turn.
And Marion says Fonzie can't force people to do things they don't want to do. Fonzie says yes, he can. Marion brings up that Richie doesn't want to go to the convention with his father, even though he knows how much it would mean to him. Fonzie is horrified.
I am filled with disappointment.
And Richie promises to go to the convention so as not to ruin Fonzie's opinion of him. That weekend, after dropping off Ralph and Patsy at their hotel, Richie and Howard go to their room at another hotel.
It's a lot better than that flea bag we dropped the fellas off at.
Oh, yeah, well, this one's got beds.
Where Howard gives Richie his old junior leopard fez. Howard goes downstairs to sign them in and tells Richie to check the other suitcase. It's full of laughs. Richie, finding a dribble glass, a fake hand, and shattering teeth, comments that his father has turned into Bozo the Clown. Speaking of clowns, in run Donald and Junior, wearing masks, but Richie immediately recognizes them.
Oh, there's no fooling at Cunningham, is there?
Junior gives Richie a box with a fake snake in it, and when they hear someone at the door, Donald sprays him with water. It's only Ralph and Patsy, and Donald and Junior run off.
Now, those are my kind of guys.
Richie admits to Ralph and Patsy that the idea of being buddies with his dad takes some getting used to. Patsy invites Richie back to their hotel room for a triple date with some stewardesses. Richie wants to go with them, but then Howard comes in to tell Richie he changed the seating arrangements, so Richie will be sitting next to him instead of the vice poobah.
My pride and joy, looking up at me with a smile.
Then Donald runs in and tells Howard that 10 girls are trapped in the revolving doors by another lodger. Not wanting his record to be topped, Howard runs after him, after telling Richie to come along and wear his fez. Down at the convention, the lodgers welcome Richie by scratching the air and growling, and Howard has to tell an embarrassed Richie to return said welcome.
Richard, return the welcome. Huh?
One lodger boasting to another that he's sitting at the table with the Grand Poobah leads to a food fight. Richie wants no part in it, until Junior almost hits him with some food.
What's wrong with this guy? You're a dud.
Then Richie accidentally hits the waitress with some food. He tells her he's sorry, and she says he will be. Her son's a lawyer. Al leads a toast to Howard, the new Grand Poobah, and in is wheeled a huge cake, out of which pops an exotic dancer. She baby talks Howard with a piece of cake, which mostly seems to embarrass him.
Pretty please with sugar on it?
Pretty pleased with sugar on it.
Then all the single men line up for a kiss from the dancer. Donald attempts to as well, and has to be reminded by his son that he's married.
Oh, I forgot, but I'm not dead.
He shoves Junior into line, and Junior gives her a long kiss, which she seems to be struggling against. Junior tries to get Richie to kiss the dancer, but Richie doesn't want to, and Howard defends his son when the others call him chicken.
Fellas, Rich is just not in the mood, that's all, huh?
Then all the lodgers, save Richie, go outside to stop traffic. The dancer, whose name is Margot, sits with Richie, and they talk, during which she reveals that she's studying creative writing at night school.
It's kind of a coincidence.
You jump out of cakes too?
Richie, also a writer, invites her to his room to read some of the articles he's written. He has to ask Howard for the key to their room, and naturally, Howard assumes this is for sex reasons.
You're going to take this girl upstairs?
Donald teases Howard, and Howard tells him to get lost. Later on, Potsy and Ralph join Howard in the empty convention room. Howard is feeling guilty over sending Richie up to the room with a girl and asks Ralph and Potsy for advice. Ralph says they think of Howard as a typical father.
Maybe a little heavier.
Ralph and his father joke around all the time, but they can't talk about anything serious. When Ralph first asked him about sex, he giggled. Potsy's father is, horribly neglectful, let's say. Howard's doing better than both of them. Potsy suggests that Howard do what he thinks a good father should do, and Howard goes upstairs to talk to Richie. Up in the room, Margot compliments Richie's writing and recounts a time when she was at a specific convention, which she plans on turning into a short story.
See, I was at this convention where I had to kiss all the guys, but this time they didn't line up. So I had to sit on their laps and kiss them.
She sits in Richie's lap as a demonstration, and they start making out. Just outside the door, Howard loudly talks to himself about dropping his key.
Oh, my goodness, I dropped my key.
And Richie and Margot disentangle themselves. Howard enters, and Margot leaves after she and Richie say goodbye. Richie snaps at Howard for coming back up.
You knew that we were up here? How could you do this?
What?
And Howard admits he was thinking like a father, not like a buddy, and he's not cut out to be like Donald. Richie says that Donald and Junior have to be buddies because no one else can stand them. What he and Howard have is much better than being buddies. For as long as Richie can remember, Howard has always been there for Richie, like when Richie blew the basketball championship, and Howard comforted him, and even offered him a lifesaver.
Yeah, peppermint.
Howard's no buddy, but he's a darn good father. Howard hugs his son. Aww. Howard admits to Richie that he would like to pull just one buddy-buddy prank. It just so happens Howard has the key to Donald and Junior's room, and father and son go to throw all of the Hedges' luggage out their window.
Thank you, Peter. That was Father and Son. It first aired back on March 4th, 1980. Happy Days was followed by a new Laverne and Shirley. This week, they finished up their two-parter, Murder on the Moose Jaw Express. CBS aired The White Shadow, in which Coach Reeves suspects one of his players is being abused by his father.
Why, you snotty Oh, shut up! I haven't even touched it yet.
And NBC had a new installment of The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo, in which Lobo goes looking for a buried treasure. So, Peter, of those three choices, what are you watching?
I want to see Lobo hunt for buried treasure.
I have to admit, I'm going to Sheriff Lobo as well. I am part of the reason why Happy Days' ratings are declining in direct competition with Sheriff Lobo. And as for The White Shadow, why does that show have to be such a downer all the time? Nobody wants to see that on TV. Come on, they've had a hard day. They don't want to see that kind of story.
They want to see sheriffs hunt for buried treasure and take strippers over the border and see Martians.
Father and Son was directed by Jerry Paris and was written by our buddy, Fred Fox Jr. The most recent of Fred's episodes that we watched was Hot Stuff. As for guest stars this week, let's start with David Ketchum as Donald Hedges Sr. We've talked about Dave several times before. He was a writer-actor from Quincy, Illinois, who worked in TV and film from the early 60s to the late 90s. He worked on Happy Days as both an actor and a writer. As an actor, he was in Rotsey and A Shot in the Dark. As a writer, his episodes include Fonzie Meets Cat and Burlesque. We'll be reviewing some more episodes that Dave wrote very, very soon. In fact, he wrote the last 2 episodes of this very season. So, Peter, what did you think of David Ketchum as Donald Hedges Sr.?
He is very good at playing a guy who thinks he's the life of the party, but is instead just deeply obnoxious and also is kind of creepy. So, kudos. You did a great job in making a character who is just the worst.
I would agree. Donald Hedges Sr. is a terrible person and one that I wouldn't want to be around for even 5 minutes. But David Ketchum does a wonderful job bringing him to life and making him this very vile and vulgar character. We also have Clint Howard as Donald Hedges Jr. Ron's real-life brother Clint has also been on Happy Days a couple times before, first as Moose in Bringing Up Spike, and then as the off-screen heckler in The Magic Show. This is his last appearance on Happy Days. What did you think of Clint Howard as Donald Hedges Jr.?
For the most part, he's just as terrible as his father, but you do kind of get the sense that it's not entirely his fault because he was raised by Donald Sr. So, of course, he is beholden to his upbringing, and I sort of got the sense that maybe if things had been different, he could have been less terrible. That being said, he does grab Margot and kiss her as she is visibly struggling against him, so he is pretty terrible.
Donald Hedges Jr. is also a pretty awful human being, and Clint Howard makes the most of that. In a way, these Hedges characters are kind of fun for the actors to play because you get to be your worst self.
Absolutely. I think it might be more fun for them to play than for us to watch.
They're supposed to make our skin crawl whenever they're on screen, and they really do that very well. We also have Nyla Rogers as Margot the Cake Girl. Nyla also guested on Booze and Buddies, but then got out of show business altogether and became a marriage and family therapist.
Oh, that's nice.
Everything reminds me of my therapist. My checkbook reminds me of my therapist.
So what did you think of Nyla Rogers as Margot the Cake Girl?
I thought she was very good. I liked the juxtaposition between her behavior when she's on the clock. There's a part where she picks up a piece of cake and she baby talks Howard, and she basically plays "Here Comes the Airplane" with it. It's very creepy and disturbing. Then when she's off the clock and she's just chatting with Richie, she comes across as just a perfectly normal, non-baby talking person. Also, I felt really sorry for her during the kissing scene. You shouldn't have to kiss people if you pop out of a cake for a living.
I thought Nyla did a wonderful job playing this character who has to do all these degrading and humiliating things as part of her job, and then is trying to put herself through school. We do get to see both sides of Margot's personality in this episode. That scene where she is baby talking to Howard and feeding him the cake, that made me cringe so hard, but I think it's supposed to. Also, again, as with the behavior of the Hedges, this cake girl ritual is supposed to be repellent and disgusting. So
yeah.
The stories I could tell of frenzied bachelor parties and exotic dancers jumping out of cakes. Sounds exciting? Sure. But around midnight, there you are, frustrated and disappointed with a fake cake you can't eat and a dancer named Candy who has to leave to drive her babysitter home.
Last but not least, we have Helen Verbit as the waitress. Helen was a New York actress who worked in film and TV from the early 60s until her death in 1996. Helen's movies include Little Big Man, The Lonely Guy, and How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. Her TV credits include The Nanny, Night Court, Wonder Woman, Kojak, Good Times, Barney Miller, and Mr. Belvedere.
Mr. Belvedere is the light of my life.
What did you think of Helen Verbit as the waitress?
She pretty much is only there just for the one joke, but it's a pretty funny joke.
I'm sorry. Oh, you will be. My son is a lawyer.
I do feel sorry for her. She probably has to do a lot of these conventions.
Yeah, my sympathies were totally with the waitress. There is a shot in this episode where you see the whole convention room and these idiot conventioners are throwing food all around, and in the center of the room is the waitress. And I thought, oh, wow, this woman's weekend is going to suck. And then when she gets hit in the face, she screams.
She screams like she's in actual pain, and maybe she is. Richie threw pretty hard because he was trying to hit Junior, who sucks.
This was a time when Ron Howard's baseball prowess actually came into play on Happy Days. As for songs, there are none this week, but we do have some cultural and historical references. Richie, Potsy, and Ralph are planning to attend a Chicago Bears game. The writers have forgotten that these characters are Green Bay Packers fans who would likely hate the Bears. Then again, perhaps they are attending a Bears-Packers game. If this episode is taking place in 1961, the two teams played each other on November 12th at Wrigley Field.
Either it is a Packers-Bears game and they're going to root for the Packers, or the Bears are playing against someone else and they are going specifically to root for the people that the Bears are playing against. That's next level haterdom.
That is taking the obsession to an all new level. Well, the Packers that year beat the Bears 31-28, so that's some comfort to the people of Milwaukee. Ralph mentions the Untouchables.
If I duck down, how can I drive?
They do it on the Untouchables. Just do it.
This was a crime drama set in 1930s Chicago that aired on ABC from 1959 to 1963.
Elliot Ness hails the underworld. And a hail of full of answer from those who blaze defiance at the Untouchables.
We have a lot of novelty items in this episode. The dribble glass is one of many novelty items attributed to a Danish-American inventor named S.S. Adams. He also invented the spring snake can that we see in this episode.
I was in a novelty store, and I noticed they're still making the gag peanut brittle. Looks like a can of peanut brittle, and then you open it up, and then snakes fly out. Ah!
Chattering teeth, however, were invented by a Chicagoan, Eddie Goldfarb, who is still alive at the age of 100.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Whoopee cushions have been traced back to ancient Rome, but the modern rubber version was developed in the 1930s.
He's lost his reason, 'cause it's the season for making whoopee.
Richie compares Howard to Bozo the Clown. Created by Alan W. Livingston in 1946, Bozo first appeared in a book and record set. The character then started appearing in comics and on Los Angeles television, where he was originally played by Pinto Colvig. But then in 1956, a man named Larry Harmon bought the character and turned it into a franchise. There were different local Bozo the Clown shows in cities across America, most successfully in Chicago, where he was played by Bob Bell, starting in 1960.
Are you all ready for more fun and lots of prizes? Then stand by. We're all ready to play Bozo's Grand Prize Game!
Richie says he wrote an article about the Cold War. Have we mentioned that this term was first used by George Orwell in 1945 in an article that predicted world events?
This a cautionary tale, words of George Orwell.
Or was this perhaps an example of a self-fulfilling prophecy of the world trying to live up to the predictions of George Orwell and succeeding?
I did not know that, so thank you for telling me that.
Donald says, ring-a-ding-ding. In 1961, the year that this episode is taking place, Frank Sinatra released an entire album of up-tempo numbers called Ring-a-Ding-Ding. The title track was written by Sammy Cahn and Jimmy Van Heusen.
And your heart goes ring-a-ding-ding, ring-a-ding-ding, ring-a-ding-ding.
Ralph and Potsy are going to the Peppermint Lounge, a popular night spot that was in New York, not Chicago. Although this club had a major impact on pop culture, even inspiring the #1 hit song, The Peppermint Twist.
Yeah, the name of the dance is the Peppermint Twist.
It only lasted from 1958 to 1965, when it lost its liquor license and was sold. Potsy says Howard is Ozzie Nelson and Robert Young rolled into one. These were two popular sitcom fathers of the 1950s. Ozzie played a fictionalized version of himself on The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, while Robert Young played Jim Anderson on Father Knows Best. Have you availed yourself of either of those shows?
Ozzie and Harriet lasted for 14 years. I have to draw the line somewhere, and I just haven't had time to check out Father Knows Best.
Richie mentions the time that Howard offered him a lifesaver after he lost the big game. This was in A Shot in the Dark, also written by Fred Fox Jr.
Good for you, Fred.
Other observations this week. One of the weirdly consistent themes in this series is that even Howard seems to find the antics of the Leopard Lodge childish and tedious, and he's the grand poobah. If he doesn't like the leopards, why is he in it?
Thinking about the lodge system of the mid-20th century, I feel like it's a way for men to connect to each other.
It's a place for men to come together.
Because at the time, you're basically discouraged from doing that as a man in mid-20th century America. You're supposed to be a stoic, stolid patriarch. You are not supposed to have feelings. So you join a lodge, you do all these stupid, meaningless rituals and play stupid, meaningless pranks, all in the attempt to find some sort of emotional connection that you're not going to be able to get in regular society. Maybe some of the lodgers do get something out of it, but Howard doesn't seem to. Because, as we see in this episode, he has a genuine emotional connection with his son, and he's able to be there for him emotionally in a way that Ralph's father and Donald are not able to be for their sons.
That is a good explanation of why these lodges exist. The raccoons and the water buffaloes, etc., etc.
Put it there, brother. The secret water buffalo handshake.
Was Donald's comment about Joni meant to be creepy at the time, or does it just seem that way in retrospect? Peter, your thoughts?
I hope it's the former. It's probably the latter. We know that Joni doesn't like the comments, but she seems more just annoyed than creeped out. But maybe we were supposed to infer the being creeped out by it.
This scene went in a way that I did not expect. I thought that Joni just found the comments annoying.
Oh, every time he sees me, he tells me I'm growing like a weed. If I hear that one more time, I'll scream.
But then Donald takes it down a completely other avenue, and I was not prepared for that.
Yeah, he adds in the part about how she's good looking, which is kind of a weird thing to say about a 17-year-old if you are old enough to be your father. I feel like the scene does a very good job at setting up both the fact that Donald is just obnoxious to be around, but also he's very, very creepy.
That's what they were intending. They succeeded. When Ron Howard enters this episode, he gets a delayed cheer from the studio audience.
Hello.
Hi. When Henry Winkler enters with Scott Baio, the cheer is immediate. So I could see why Ron left the show just a few weeks after this episode. We are really near the end of Ron's run on the show.
We really are.
Did you notice that when Richie comes in, it's like, yay. And then when Fonzie and Chachi come in, it's this huge roar. So
I definitely noticed. People were nuts for Scott Baio at the time, and I do not know why.
They really do not want us to miss the theme of Howard and Richie being buddies. If you don't believe that, take a drink every time someone says buddy or buddies in this episode. You will be dead by the end of Father and Son.
It kept making me think of the Garth Marenghi's Dark Place quote, "You and he were buddies, weren't you?" I'm probably doing it wrong because I can't do a Matt Berry voice, but that's what it made me think of.
You and he were buddies, weren't you?
This is one of those episodes where there is a definite theme about parents being friends with their children as opposed to being parents, and they really don't want us to miss it, so they have characters talk about it directly all through the episode. And I thought, oh, maybe they should lighten up a little bit and just let us infer some of this. And then I realized a lot of Happy Days audience is kids, and maybe to kids this isn't an obvious idea, so they do have to explain it over and over again.
Tell me a story, then I'll go to bed.
This week, it's Fonzie who leaves the door wide open for an entire scene.
Out in the crate, wide open.
For For shame, Fonzie.
He's angry at Chachi for not dressing appropriately to visit their grandmother, their beloved grandmother Nussbaum.
That was another thing that made me mad this week. Chachi showing disrespect for Grandma Nussbaum.
Aren't you Italian, dude? Have some respect for your family.
Don't ever take sides with anyone against the family again.
We've met Grandma Nussbaum. She is a nice lady. Chachi should be happy to go over there and visit with her. Richie continues his streak of cheating on Lori Beth this week. He wants to be fixed up with a stewardess, and he gets very cozy with Margot, the cake girl.
What the heck, Richie? You're supposed to be better than the Hedges.
Man, he's been trying to get with every girl that comes into his line of view.
Almost as if he's not happy with Lori Beth because he feels stifled by heterosexual expectations for relationships. That can't be.
I think Ron and Clint Howard must have gotten some fun out of doing that food fight scene. I could definitely see the sibling relationship there.
Yeah, siblings are like that.
So now Al Del Vecchio is jealous of Howard being the grand poobah. I thought Al barely got into the Leopards at all, and now he wants to run it? What's going on?
He's had a taste of power that comes with potentially considering renaming his restaurant after himself, and now he's becoming more ambitious. Less of a doormat, you know?
The kissing scene gets a little assaulty, or
yeah.
a lot assaulty. Here, I think it's pretty clearly meant to be disturbing because we see Richie's reaction to it, and you can see why Richie would not want to imitate what Donald Hedges Jr. is doing. The show remembered that both Ralph and Potsy have had strained relationships with their own fathers.
We have seen before that Potsy does want to join the Cunninghams because Howard would be a preferable father to his own, even though Howard semi-blatantly hates Potsy's guts.
I don't think Potsy will ever quite give up on that dream. I think all the way through the rest of the series, he would still want to be considered an honorary Cunningham. I thought that Ralph and Potsy's scene with Howard represented those characters at their best. I think this is one of the prouder moments in the history of Ralph and Potsy.
Absolutely. It's easy to joke about the fact that Howard is in such a low place that he would ask Ralph and Potsy for advice, but they step up to the plate. They give genuinely good advice, and they are able to help Howard figure out what he wants to do, and because of that, Howard is able to connect with his son.
They balance that by having Ralph and Potsy act like complete jackasses on the car ride down. So we got to see them being their normal idiotic selves earlier in the episode, and now we get to see them being more like real, fully dimensional human beings. In fact, that scene with Ralph, Potsy, and Howard was my favorite moment in all of Father and Son. And this is a minor point, but it stuck out to me. Millions now living will not remember the days when hotel rooms had actual keys, but they did. These were actual metal keys that they would give you to open doors to hotel rooms and motel rooms. And I miss them. Now, of course, we only have the little key cards.
Which isn't really the same. There's something kind of magical about actual metal keys.
I think it's actually in a Gary Marshall movie, Pretty Woman, where Richard Gere says something like, I miss hotel keys.
I miss keys.
So, Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions this week?
I absolutely love the outfit that Fonzie wore to go see Grandma Nussbaum. He's wearing a collared shirt and a striped tie underneath his leather jacket.
Am I wearing a tie?
Yes, you are, Arthur, and you look so nice.
Thanks very much, Mrs. C.
It's very silly looking, but I love it. I love that Fonzie respects his grandmother enough to put on a tie.
I suggest you put on a tie.
But not enough to not wear his leather jacket because, come on, it's his thing.
As soon as I saw this episode, I thought Peter is going to go crazy for Fonzie's outfit in this thing. I knew you would when I saw that outfit.
This being a Leopard Lodge focused episode, we get to see a lot of fezzes. I think this is also the first time that we see the Junior Leopard Lodge fez, which apparently Richie used to wear when he was a little boy, which is kind of a disturbing thought that the Lodge is bringing young children into their world, their stupid, stupid world. I feel like the secondary theme of this episode is toxic masculinity and misogyny. And yeah, I guess that is how toxic masculinity and misogyny function. You train children in it from a young age so that they are able to replicate it when they are adults.
Well, this episode is both optimistic and pessimistic about that, in that we see that Donald Hedges Jr. probably will carry on the tradition, but Richie Cunningham isn't going to. In a way, you can see how these organizations are going to decline and die eventually.
And honestly, it's hard to feel sad about that. I get that lodges are like an important part of the mid-20th century America, and it's worth understanding why they have that importance and what that importance served, but also it looks like that they sucked. So it's kind of a good riddance situation.
And I guess if we're talking about fashion, we have to talk a little bit about Donald Hedges Sr.'s plaid blazer.
He is a tacky, tacky man, which is not worse than the being creepy, but he is very tacky.
So, Peter, I will ask that age-old, timeless question, was this episode any good?
I think this is almost one of of my favorite episodes of the season for all the reasons that we discussed. I like that it's ultimately a very good exploration of Howard and Richie's relationship and why it's as solid as it is. But man, I am really sick of the writers forgetting that Richie has a girlfriend. I honestly think that his dynamic with Margot the dancer, which I liked a lot, would have been better if it had been entirely platonic and they had just been talking about their writing and there had been no making out. I get why Richie is the one guy who respects her and isn't a huge creep to her, but in the context of this episode, it feels a little bit like getting a cookie for basic human decency.
For me, this episode not only had some big laugh moments, but also an emotionally resonant story between Howard and Richie. I will agree with some of the flaws that you mentioned. I didn't like that Richie's discussion with Margot did eventually lead to making out. I thought that felt a little tacked on. It didn't feel like that conversation was headed in that direction. And Richie is being kind of scumbag here to be cheating on Lori Beth again. I think in this version of the Happy Days universe, Lori Beth does not exist, or Lori Beth is not even a factor.
Continuity is a spotty thing in Happy Days.
But I think overall, this episode has a lot to recommend about it. A really good Howard and Richie story, a great moment for Potsy and Ralph, a funny little thing for Fonzie to do, and some genuinely very vile villain characters in this episode.
And I also thought it had one of the better tags. The idea of Howard and Richie bonding by making life harder for the Hedges is very, very funny.
What do you say we go in there and throw all their luggage out the window, huh?
Yeah! Ron Howard is able to sound so delighted at the prospect of doing something mean to the Hedges. I loved that.
The Hedges very much deserve their comeuppance. And I think one of the great moments in this episode, and you can hear the audience's reaction to it, is when Richie says that the Hedges have to be buddies because no one else can stand them.
Donald and Junior have to be buddies. Nobody else can stand them.
This episode was surprisingly emotionally resonant for me. I thought about my own relationship with my own father during this one. Despite its flaws, Father and Son comes highly recommended from me.
And me.
So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Peter Volfranc. That's PeterVulfranc.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysareours.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysareuspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, Potsy tries for a singing career in A Potsy is Born.
I can hardly wait to see how that one turns out. So, see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Like father, like son. Like father, like son. Think about it.